Bava Batra in Hey Amud Aleph. Okay. Laota bosha, laota kלימה. I don't know why, but like since my youth or since the days of yeshiva, I always say it's a bosha and a kלימה. I don't know why, but I guess it comes from here. I don't know why. I heard that once. It's a shanda, it's a bosha, it's a kלימה. I don't know. So this is the source for it apparently. It's a bosha and a kלימה. Anyway. Right? I say that all the time, maybe? No, anyway. Okay, so... fair. Okay. So this week we'll be talking about the, I guess, kind of famous idea that compares Moshe Rabbeinu to the Shemesh and Yoshua to the Levana. Okay? So we'll see that it comes up in a particular context here in Bava Batra, which is less our focus, but we'll use that as a jumping point to try to understand what that analogy is meant to teach us. We'll see some other sugyas and shas that also talk about a similar idea. And then I think we'll spend most of the time actually learning the Anaf Yosef kind of inside, because he does a whole field full of trying to give a few explanations, which I thought actually were quite nice. Okay? So the Gemara in Bava Batra, in Hey Amud Aleph, it starts as follows. Kayotze b'davar, ata omer. The Kayotze b'davar is going on the previous Gemara, which I didn't bring. V'netatcha me'odcha alav, v'natata me'odcha alav, v'lo kol hodcha. So this is when Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe says to Hashem, appoint a leader after me. Right? This is at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. So Hashem says, go manet Yoshua, and he says, v'natata me'odcha alav. Give him some of your hod. So it says me'odcha, from your hod, v'lo kol hodcha. Don't give him all of your splendor, just some of it. So what does that mean? Kenim sheboto ador amru, Pnei Moshe kipnei Chama, Pnei Yoshua kipnei Levana. That only some of Moshe's splendor went to Yoshua, not all of it. And the result of that was that Moshe's face was like the sun, Yoshua's face was like the moon. Laota bosha, laota kלימה. Right. So what does that mean? What are they saying? Feel pshat. Like what are they? What is the bosha and the kלימה here?
He was less than Moshe.
Yeah. And so what's the? Like who is it a bosha and a kלימה for? So the Mefarshim, they say it means like this. Kenim are saying that about like their generation. In other words, our dor, we didn't have enough zchut to merit a leader who had Moshe's brilliance, as it were. So laota bosha. Shebeoto dor, the dor of Bayaretz, right? The ones going, the generation of Yoshua. Yeah.
And every bosha that we don't have Moshe anymore.
So it could be as a bosha that we don't have Moshe anymore, or it could be as a bosha that like we're stuck with Yoshua Kivyachol in the sense that we didn't merit someone greater. But it's open to interpretation what it could mean.
Oh, there is the midrash that says that Moshe was offered to enter the land of Israel as a layman, and he refused. He couldn't walk in.
Where is that? I've never heard that before.
Feel free, it's in the...
I heard that.
Really?
Yes, that. In other words, he was offered the option to walk in as a layman, and since he did not feel he couldn't, quote unquote, demote himself, so he said, "Okay, fine.
Really?
I'll walk up to Har Nevo.
I'd like to know the source of that.
See the future and call it a day."
I know a lot of midrashim that say he fought tooth and nail with the Malach HaMavet and this and that he didn't want to die. But very nice. Okay.
Yeah, there's of course, the idea is that, speaking of Moshe and Yoshua, that he saw for the first time that Yoshua went in to Oel Moed.
Yeah.
And then Yoshua comes out, and Moshe asks him, "Okay, what's the message you got?"
Mm-hmm.
Yoshua said, "No, you're not privy anymore."
Right.
So that's when he asked death. He said they had enough.
Right. Okay, man.
It's hard to step down.
Oh, well, that's sure. There's who is it? There's a rabbi. He says in the Midrash. He says something like, "Before I was appointed to whatever position, right?" He says, "You could have." He uses some analogy, right? You could have put me in a boiling pot. I don't remember the details. It's a famous idea, though. Like you could have put me in a boiling pot, and I wouldn't have agreed. Now that I'm in this position, you try to take me out of it. Like you could tie me up with lines, and I wouldn't agree. In other words, he recognized that even though he refused the power at all costs, he didn't want it. But once he had it, he said, "I can't give it up." The power corrupts. Yeah, Moshe Rabbeinu, same idea, obviously. Right? He didn't want the mucha. Okay. Okay, so is there anything else that we can say about this site? Why Moshe is okay, I understand Yoshua is not as great as Moshe, but is there any significance to Chama and Levana in particular, by way of the analogy?
Because when Moshe came
from Mount Sinai, his face was
glowing. Yפה, קרן אור פניו.
קרן פני אור פני משה.
No, but the main point is
Very
that
good.
Moshe is the original,
Yeah, the
origin
sun doesn't
light.
have his own light. It's
Okay,
Yeshua-
good. Yפה, good.
Yeshua-
You guys are getting to the Anaf Yosef. Very good.
Oh,
it's a
Michelangelo's
machloket
interpretation wasn't
between a
Moshe had
9-year-old
horns.
and
So,
like
As a
a
gun,
whole-
it's a small reflection.
adult.
It's not the same. But even though if you go to the desert,
On what?
oh no,
the moon is
What?
pretty bright.
9-year-old is you,
It's a reflection of the
and he's the old.
Can't remember, but see, it's very strong.
Me? Oh,
It just when
Oh, he's
you leave
already-
the
you're
city,
the
you
old
don't
guy.
actually
I'm-
see it.
Okay, let's continue. Bava Batra, so you're all right. We'll get to each of your opinions shortly. Bava Batra Kuf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. This is actually in the Hemshech of our sugya, okay? Of our Masechta, excuse me. Yep. Tanu Rabbanan, 80 Talmidim, this is, maybe you guys have heard this. 80 Talmidim Ayu leHillel Zaken. This also comes up in Masechet Sukkah. Right, Hillel Zaken had 80 students. 80 מהם ראויים שתשרה עליהם שכינה כמשה רבנו. Right? 30 of the 80 of Hillel's students were so great that they merited having the Shekhinah rest on them as it rested on Moshe, right? And I think Rashi there, or the Rashbam of Batra, right? He says, but because the Shekhinah doesn't have that level of hashgacha in their day, that's the only reason they didn't merit it. But they would have if they'd lived back then. 30 מהם ראויים שתעמוד להן חמה כיהושע בן נון. 30 of them were worthy the sun. So what is that a reference to?
Shemesh b'givon.
יפה. שמש בגבעון דום, right? בערך בעמק ענון. ו20 בינונים. Okay, and then it says that, right, so we said there's 80 altogether, so 30, and then 20 in between. What is the in between? In between what and what? Right?
Between the Shekhinah Moshe Rabbeinu and the Chama Yeshua.
Yeah, which is the top and which is on bottom, though? No, it's which is the greater one and which is the lower one that's in between.
Moshe is the greater one.
Right, so I think the pshat is that the Ruin Shetishrei Alein Shechina is the greatest. Okay.
Because Yeshua had such a greatness. So you gotta be
Which is what?
very...
Okay, so good.
So
So,
Hamas stopped. Kadosh Baruch Hu literally stopped the world for Yeshua.
all right.
He stopped like the חוקי כל החוקי
Okay,
פיזיקה.
Yes, so
ים סוף wasn't for Moshe, wasn't ים סוף was for the... חלק מיציאת מצרים.
So you're touching on, and we bring actually the Gemara Avodah Zarah in the next source, although we don't go into the question you're asking, but I'll just allude to it because you brought it up. The whole story of Yoshua and the Shemesh and the Givon Dom and all that, and what happened there, the Gemara talks about it in Avodah Zarah, but the Rishonim, particularly I think the Ralbag, so he talks about, like, Al Panav, the miracle that happened, if you understand it according to the Psukim, the miracle that happened to Yoshua was way greater than anything that happened during Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's what the Ralbag says. Yetziat Mitzrayim, okay, you're doing all these miracles, even Makap Echor, I'm sure they're Nisim, but they're in the world. And what he describes in Sefer Yoshua is that Hashem changed the nature of the entire universe. That is clearly a much, much greater miracle than just changing something here on earth. So he says, so what's the big deal about Yetziat Mitzrayim? Why don't we commemorate Shemesh
Also,
B'Givon
it
Dom?
affects so many people.
And you affect, right, yeah. And then
I
the
mean,
Malbim talks about how if you stop the sun for that period of time, it like offsets all the mazalot and it changes all of history from that point onward. And they're mitpalpel, the achronim there. So, spoiler alert, just the Ralbag, he was a rationalist, the Ralbag, right? He always tried to interpret things very logically. So in his Perush, he actually understands, this isn't the point here, but Shemesh B'Givon Dom, Yerech B'Emek Ayalon, he feels ne'elatz to explain it, that it's not that a miracle happened, but that Bnei Yisrael defeated their enemies so quickly. It's a poetic way of
Before
saying
the sun set.
it's as if the sun stood still. That's how fast the defeat was. Because he can't accept the impossible nature of the sun and the moon staying still in the
He says
cosmos.
is asking.
But not only Yeshua
This nest
stopped
is way
the
greater
sun.
than every
Right.
Shekhinah.
That's what maybe reminds me of it. It's like we're saying Yoshua is like the Lebanon, Moshe is like the Chama, but what about the fact that there was a miracle done for Yoshua that Al Panav is so much greater than any miracle Moshe ever did?
But that's
Right?
not the only time that the sun stopped.
When else did the sun stop?
Matmimon Ben Gurion.
Oh my gosh! Oh my goodness!
Well,
That's coming up.
Before
Kol
we
hakavod.
head off, you can always
That's the next one. Cool.
claim as
Yeah, but yeah, you
Galileo
know this.
I don't know.
that what
School.
stopped was the spinning of
You
the
learned
earth.
with him before.
What?
You learned this from before.
Just putting that out there.
Oh, they learned it in school, this story.
I don't know. Was the Albag? He was what, 1300s? Was that before or after?
Galileo is
Safa.
what was it,
We will.
500? No,
What happened when
it's
you- is he
1500s.
the
So
sh-
the Albag's day, that wasn't an option.
No, that's a
Call it
different
that way.
one.
I think maybe the
Baruch
Malbim
Mayim.
talks about it. 'Cause he was much later. I'm not sure. In any event,
Like that.
it's a shiur in and of itself, that whole question. But let us.
Let everybody know in the recording that you're so happy right now.
What?
You're
So
proud
much
of
nachat.
Oh yeah, incredible nachat. That you knew Nakdimon ben Gurion. That's the next source. It was very, very good. Okay, let's go back to the Gemara in Bava
So please know
Batra.
he's wearing a uniform for school. Please note that.
Well, I don't have anything else to wear except for school.
It's true. All he has is these
Well,
T-shirts.
there is a
Yeah.
reason why on Shabbat we sing V'tinok lelamdo sefer. Okay, not on regular days.
Okay, back to the Bava Batra. Okay, good question, Kobe. Good ha'ara to Oren and to Netana. Let's continue. Okay, so it says Gadol shebechulan Yonatan ben Uziel, Katan shebechulan Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. So if Hillel's 80 students, the greatest was Yonatan ben Uziel, the least great was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. That's bizarre, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is a big gadol. Let's see what it says. Amru alav Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, shelo eniach mikra u'mishnah v'talmud v'alachot v'agadot v'diktukei Torah v'diktutei sofrim v'kalim v'chamurim v'gzerot shavot v'tkufot v'gematриot v'mushalot kofsim v'mushalot shualim sichat shedim, sichat dekalim v'sichat malachei hasharet v'davar gadol v'davar katan. Right? So, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the least of Hillel's 80 students. He knew all this. Okay? He knew Sichat Dekalim, which is whatever, the speech of
That's all he
the
knew.
palm trees. No, he knew all of it. He knew everything.
He knew
Okay?
everything that can possibly
Basically,
be
that,
known.
yeah. I mean, Davar Gadol, what's Davar
So
Gadol?
it's
So the Gemara
better
interprets.
than-
So that's
It's better than the...
Yonatan ben Uziel.
Yeah.
Good, so the Gemara is about to ask that. Very good. So it says, first of all, what is Davar Gadol? Maaseh Merkava, right? The secrets of the heavens. And Davar Katan, Avayot de'abai derava, right? The Pilpulim of the Shas. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai knew all of it. Good. The Kayim Mashinemar le'enchil ohava yesh v'yotzotehem amale. Okay, v'chi me'achad dekatan shebchulam ken, gadol shebchulam alcha kama v'kama. So this is what Oren just asked, right? If Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai knows all this, so what's the gap between him and Yonatan ben Uziel?
what they
So the Gemara says, Amru alav al Yonatan ben Uziel, שבשעה שיושב ועוסק בתורה, כל עוף שפורח עליו נשרף. Yonatan ben Uziel was so great that when he learned Torah, any bird that flew above him would instantly incinerate, burst into flame. So holy was he.
Why?
He was so kadosh when he learned Torah, like a Rashbi type, that he learned Torah on such a level that there was a kilo fire that descended when he learned. Okay, so we see here, why did I bring this? Because we see here an association between Dafka the Chama and Yoshua ben Nun, and a reference to Shemesh Begivon Dom. And that takes us to the next makor, which Oren alluded to as well. Tana, Kishen Shamda lo Chama li Yoshua, just as the sun stood for Yoshua in the story in Sefer Yoshua, Kach Amda lo Chama lo Moshe ulenakdimon ben Gurion. There's two others.
Moshe also had something with the Chama.
And Moshe also had something with...
Some siman. So when the sound comes in, no? You know
Okay.
what you're talking about?
כחצות.
Oh, there's some siman, כשהשמש תגיע. Is it going to talk about this or is it not going to...
It's going to talk about Moshe, but not that. It's going to give a different source, I think. Maybe. So there's two others that the sun also stood for miraculously, right? We assume this
didn't.
Braita didn't hold like a Ralbag, that it was
Moshe
just poetic.
didn't.
Well, it says for Moshe one time the sun stood, and for Nakdimon ben Gurion. Okay,
But when?
So
Did
we're-
it stand for?
we're about to learn. We're about to find out. So Yoshua, how do we know? Cry. Okay, the Sukkim say it explicitly. Nakdimon ben Gurion, Gemara. Right? It's a story. This is the story. Is actually not brought in Avodah Zarah. It's brought in Tanit, and I didn't bring it here, but Oren learned it in school. There's a story in the Masechet Tanit about Nakdimon ben Gurion that the sun stood still for him. LeMoshe minalan. How do we know that for Moshe Rabbeinu the sun stood still? Atya achel achel. K'tiv hacha achel tet pachtecha, u'k'tiv hatem b'Yoshua achel gadelcha. A gzera shara between the story of Yoshua and the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. So we know also for Moshe the sun stood still, and the context of achel tet pachtecha is in the context, I think, of Sichon. So the limud here is that in the battle of Sichon, that the sun stood still when Moshe and Bnei Yisrael were fighting against Sichon Melech HaAmori. רבי יוחנן אמר, את תת, כתיב אחר תת פחתך, וכתיב ביהושע, ביום תת השם את האמורי. So Rabbi Yochanan tries to find a slightly sharper gzera shava, because he sees in Yoshua a reference to Ha'emori, and the pasuk by Moshe is with Sichon Melech Emori. But same idea. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani amar, migufei dekra shmatle. I don't need a gzera shava, I can learn from the pasuk itself. Asher yishme'un shimacha v'ragzu v'chalu mipanecha. This is in the context of Moshe Rabbeinu. So what does that mean? That they'll hear the rumor, and then they will be terrified. So what does it mean? When will the enemy be terrified? When the sun stood still for Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? Now the Gemara brings a contradiction. Where does it say that? Yoshua. When it says by Yoshua that the miracle that happened there never happened before or after. So how do you understand? Now you're telling me that it happened just one generation prior with Moshe. So, and with Nachdiman ben Gurion. So So there was a miracle that the sun stood still, but by Yoshua it lasted longer. Okay, that's one way to understand it. הם במורל בחורון, והשם השליך עליהם אבנים גדולות מן השמיים עד הזקה וימותו. With Yoshua, it's not just that the sun stood still or the moon stood still, but also there were these avnei barad that miraculously fell and crushed the Emori, the enemy as they were fleeing. So that didn't happen by Moshe. So the Gemara is trying to find a reason why by Yoshua it was a bigger miracle than it was by Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? So here we see the sun with Moshe. In other words, the sun stopped in the days of Moshe, and it fills in a bit more about this idea of Moshe ki pnei chama, Yoshua ki pnei levana. Just quickly in the Gemara Ta'anit, so it brings the story of Nachdiman ben Gurion, which I didn't bring here because it's a long story, but it just adds Tana lo Nachdiman shemo ela Buni shemo. His real name was actually not Nachdiman, it was Buni. Or Bani. Bani? Okay. Velama nikra shmo Nachdiman. Why was he called Nachdiman? Here. Ela Buni shemo. Velama nikra shmo Nachdiman? Shenit Nikdera chama ba'avuro. Okay, so what does that mean? What does it mean, like door? Right?
Like a kedera,
What do you think it means?
Kaduru panav, isn't it, when it comes like dark or black? I think on sunspots.
So, yeah, it means that the sun was like darkened on his behalf, I think. V'tanu Rabbanan shlosha nikdema lahem chama ba'avuran. Moshe v'Yoshua v'Nachdiman ben Gurion. So what's interesting about this is the name Nachdiman is based on the miracle of what happened. Nikdema lo chama. So that's a bit of a different description than it stopped.
Or an eclipse.
Right. I mean, yeah. If you're going into that whole explanation. Okay. So these are some Gemaras about Moshe, but now we didn't really. Right. This is where the Mefarshim come in. Is there any deeper connection between Moshe being like a Chama and Yoshua being like a Levana? Okay, so I want to look at the Yun Yaakov.
Why are they trying to show that Moshe also had the Chama?
Right.
And like so badly, like no.
Moshe also had it. Right.
No question about it. Everybody's saying.
Exactly. So what's motivating them?
Nachon.
These like Zera Shava. That's quite not. So, they're motivated by something. So what are they motivated by?
No wonder you needed a book.
Yeah, no, the printer stopped working. And anyways, you can barely read it. So even if it came out well. We'll start with the Yun Yaakov, and I apologize to your eyes. It is on the top, on the right side. Okay, so it says, Kenim shebeoto ador, Amru, Pnei Moshe, it works on the phone, by the way. I send out the Dapei Mekorot, so if you want to...
I'm on my phone.
Okay.
Since I'm getting this week my new glasses.
So apologize that didn't come out well this week. So it's Kenim shebeoto ador Amru, Pnei Moshe ki pnei chama, Pnei Yoshua ki pnei levana. So what does the Yun Yaakov say? לכן נראה לי מהייתיים, היית בכמה דשנהדרין, שאמר משה אתה והזקנים שבדור עמך, כפי שהיית במדרש פרשת בראשית, ואלה כוכבים גזר הקדוש ברוך הוא. כשיוצא הלבנה, יהיו הכוכבים יוצאים עמה. כשנכנסים, יהיו נכנסים עמה. So the Midrash, when it comes to Brat HaOlam, that Hashem was gozer, that the stars should go out with the moon. So we know the famous story. What?
It changes everything.
What do you mean?
Because the famous story was... the moon was saying, I should be the queen, but saying you can't have two kings in one crown.
Right.
And okay, so go and ma'ati et atzmech.
Right.
And then the stars. Here he's just saying, no, there were stars, there was the moon, They all should just be together.
I think it's connected. It's saying because Hashem punished the moon and the moon felt bad, so then Hashem said, don't feel so bad, you get the stars with you. That's how I understood it. Kiru.
Here she said the stars are together with the moon.
Right. That when that Hashem goes there, that when the moon goes out, the stars go with it. When the moon leaves, the stars leave with it. And you could tie it to that other midrash, either what I said or what you said. I'm not sure, but the idea is that the moon and the stars are together. So why is that relevant? So that's why Moshe wanted this kenim to be with Yoshua. Right. So it's part of this whole process. Hashem tells Moshe to give Yoshua some of his hod, right? But also there's the Shivim Skenim that receive the hod from Moshe Rabbeinu as well. It says, V'efshar me'haytaima she'aya Yoshua midata levana. And it could be that this is the reason why Yoshua is compared to a moon. Lekach shenitabu Eldad u'Medad. So then it says when Eldad u'Medad got nevuah, so what does Yoshua do? Right, kinebam al she'iyu b'madriga achat im Moshe. So this ties to the Midrash, right? That the moon says there can only be one king. So you have Eldad and Medad coming and prophesying like Moshe. It's Dafka Yoshua, the moon, who says you can't have this. You need one ruler like that. Moshe amar lo. What does Moshe say? I'm mekaneh atali, right? Because who is Moshe like? The Chama, and in the Midrash, the Chama doesn't say anything. I think it's a nice way to tie the Midrashim together. Yeah. Right? Very good. Connecting the dots. Amar mekaneh atali mi yiten vaya kol Hashem nivim. Okay, so he nicely ties in this analogy of Moshe Chama, Yoshua Levana to Eldad u'Medad. It's one explanation he gives.
So what does it mean? It means that one day Yoshua should be like Moshe?
No,
What?
it could have been.
Why doesn't Yoshua become the son, you're saying?
No, he should be, because the Shnei Amarot HaGadim, one day the moon should be exactly like the...
B'achrit hayamim, kid. Okay.
Yeshua has
the way to understand that, maybe the way to understand it is that the potential is like that. And we'll see, actually, the Anaf Yosef goes into that. Yeshua had that potential, he didn't necessarily fulfill it. But he should have been like Moshe Rabbeinu. That's one way to think about it.
Leadership.
He got the Yud from Sarah.
What?
He got the Yud from Sarah.
Yoshua.
Yeah.
You're just tying all these midrashim. Yeah.
Why did he get it?
I think that the main difference between them. You see the main difference in the war against Amalek.
Okay.
Oh,
You see Moshe on top of the hill, holding up his arms. So yes, there's all the midrashim what exactly that means. But you can see it at a down to earth interpretation. Is that he was seeing the battlefield from above,
Right.
and he was using his hands to make the signs to the forces down below, where everybody should go, flank, do whatever.
Okay.
Yoshua was down on the battlefield himself,
Right.
leading the forces.
Right.
He was the one in Hebrew you see the shout "Acharai," after me.
Yeah.
So it means his leadership was. He was down on the battlefield leading the forces.
Right.
Moshe was above, seeing the strategy from above. And his support were whom? Aaron and Hu.
Yeah.
Hu and Aaron, what were they? They were Rashei Hamatot, chiefs of staff.
What does that have to do with being a sun in the moon?
I think that this is the difference. In other words, the moon has the potential, or if you like, it receives. Ooh, good timing. It receives the radiance.
Mm-hmm.
It receives the guy from above seeing the grand strategy.
Okay.
And he's there to shine it on the forces.
He's the executor, not the visionary.
Exactly.
Okay. He's the CEO and the.
And he has the backing of the people down on the ground, which are following his footsteps.
Very good. Shkoyach. Very good.
we
Okay.
can go in the mamad, or
If we hear the we'll go to the mamad. Yeah. Okay. Psada. Let's just finish let's try to breeze through the end here. The Yun Yaakov. So he just finishes here. He says, "L'chach zkenim shebeoto ador amru letovat atzman pnei Yoshua kepnei levana." Because they wanted to be with Yoshua. He says, like they were the stars. So they wanted to kind of be coupled with him. And I didn't understand this last line in Yaakov. Maybe someone can help me understand. It says, "V'od yesh lomar zkenim tseru atzman al shnot Moshe shu kipnei chama." That the years of Moshe are like the sun. V'akadosh baruch hu mashlim shnotehem yom liyom. Hashem fills the years of his tzaddikim, I guess. U'shnot hachama hu 11 yom yoter mishnot halevana. ממילא נתקצרו. I didn't know that. In other words, the moon is 354 days, and the sun is 365 days, right? In terms of the moon is year, the lunar year is 11 days shorter than the solar year. But it wasn't quite clear to me how he connects that to Moshe and Yoshua. Like, Yoshua lived 10 years less than Moshe. Moshe lived 120, Yoshua lived to 110. But I don't know why that connection, I didn't understand that, and also why the Kenim would be upset about that. It wasn't clear to me, but I don't know, Tzarech Iyun, in the Iyun Yaakov. The Chidushei Geonim, which is on the left column in the second picture, so he gives a different explanation. He says, Pnei Moshe כפני חמה, ופני יהושע כפני לבנה. זקנים שבאותו הדור אמרו, אוי לה לאותה בושה, אוי לאותה כלימה. כלומר, יהושע מצד עצמו לא היה ראוי שיגיע למדרגה שיגיע אליה, אלא באמצעות משה, הוא שהשיג מה שהשיג. Yeshua only reached the level he reached because of Moshe Rabbeinu, who was his teacher. This is what you guys were saying before. ולזה היה משה במדרגת החמה, שחולק את האור לירח. Right, the sun provides the light to the moon. ויהושע במדרגת הלבנה שמקבל את האור מהשמש. Right, the moon just receives and reflects the light. It doesn't have any light of its own. ואין לה אור מעצמה. ולזה אמר, אוי לה לאותה בושה, לאותה כלימה, כי לא יראו יהושע לנבואה מעצמו, אלא מצד משה רבינו עליו השלום. It's only because Moshe gave from his hod to Yoshua that Yoshua merited anything. So that's what the Zkenim were lamenting, is that he was just a Kiliya Mekabel instead of one who gave the light himself. And the sun and the moon being the analogy then makes sense, because the sun gives and the moon just reflects it. And the Anaf Yosef, he has a whole long thing. I wanted to read it inside, but just because of the maybe I'll try to say it outside. So the Anaf Yosef there, in his Pnei Moshe K'Pnei Chama, Pnei Yoshua K'Pnei Leva, so he gives two perushim. The first perush he gives is he says, right, what Oren said before, that Moshe Rabbeinu's face, when he came down from Sinai, Karan or Panav, right, that he was radiant. So there's a midrash that says that came from the Ktarim that Bnei Yisrael received when they said, right, when Bnei Yisrael said, Naseh v'nishma. So the Gemara says, right, that 600,000 angels came down, each one with 2 crowns, and gave 1 crown Naseh, 1 crown Nishma for all Bnei Yisrael. But then after Chet HaEgel, right, to Sirotam, right, 1,200,000 angels came and each one took a crown, Malachei Chabbalah, I think he says. And that's why the Pasuk says, Ve'itnatzlu et edyam me'achorev, right, that they lost their crowns. And so Rabbi Yochanan in that Gemara says, and all of those crowns went to Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Moshe Rabbeinu received all 1,200,000 crowns from all of Bnei Israel. So what's the idea behind that? So Anaf Yosef says that the idea is that what that's really saying is that Moshe Rabbeinu was a leader who understood the need of each and every one of Bnei Israel. He received kind of like the crown, almost like the sechel of each one of Bnei Israel.
Reading the minds.
Right? Reading their minds, but like maybe in the sense of just like a good leader is a leader who understands the needs of each and every, right? That's what they said about the Rebbe, right? He understood like
the hive mind.
Or in the sense of like that, you know, the Bava Batra, he knew how to connect to every single one of the Jews in their own as an individual,
Also,
not as a community.
Everything that he had with Korach. He didn't fight with Korach. He's like, maybe you're right. Also, he didn't make that, as he said. It's like,
He knew what the needs were and how to manage, right? He knew how to lead. So the idea of that, first of all, so why was Karan or Panav? So the Anaf Yosef claims, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down and his face was radiant, because he received all of those crowns. Okay, that was the light from him understanding each and every one of Bnei Israel. And when he gave to Yoshua, so Yoshua understood some of that, but not all of that. He didn't receive that full, intuition that a leader needs to know what the people need and when to push and when not to push, etc. And so, the Zkenim of his generation are upset. They're saying it's bad for us because our leader doesn't fully understand the needs that we have the same as Moshe Rabbeinu understood because of all of that hod that he received from the crowns at Har Sinai. So Anaf Yosef kind of like connects a whole bunch of midrashim and builds that argument. And so that's the idea of the Chama and the Levana as well, that the Levana is like Pkuma. It has like less of that light. It doesn't understand everything like the sun, which is like a full kind of, it understands every part of Klal Yisrael, as it were. And then just to conclude, the second idea that the Anaf Yosef brings in his Uskenim Shebador Amru Pnei Moshe K'Pnei Chama, he actually brings an interesting proof that he says the story of Eliyahu and Elisha. So when Eliyahu Navi is going up to Shemaim, so what does Elisha say to him? Right? Elisha has a request for him. Right? What does he ask him for? Ask Eliyahu.
Come back for me.
No. That's what he says when he goes up.
And then when he goes up, what does he ask?
So he asks for Pishnaim, I think. I don't remember the exact language
Right,
of the
and he had,
pasuk.
like double the miracles or something.
Yeah,
Right?
So
Yeah, that's it,
Elisha
pasuk.
asks Eliyahu for double what Eliyahu has. Elisha says, "Give me double." Okay, to Eliyahu. And Eliyahu says, "If you see the Rechev Parashav, you'll know that your request was answered." And so then Elisha does get double, and the Gemara talks about how that he revived twice as many people as Eliyahu. Okay,
Yeah, but,
So-
but he didn't get what also
Will there be
Eliyahu
Azaka?
didn't receive. Was when Eliyahu asked for
Will there
holding
be
the rain.
Azaka?
yeah,
Then Kadosh Baruch Hu told him, "V'chi." The Rav will have only one key, and
Right.
and the student will have two. That's not fun. It's not going to happen.
right.
It means if I give you the key of rain, then you have the key of rain and the key of resurrection.
You're right. Yes, Nachon. That's true. That's in the very beginning of Tanit, right? Okay. So he said. So
Will
why
there
did
be
Elisha?
Azaka?
So what? It doesn't seem like
no,
it.
no.
Why did Elisha merit to get double the portion of Eliyahu?
So people
So-
actually believe him.
Right, and the Anaf Yosef says, "Hey, people would believe him." It's clear that he received what he asked for, but also the Anaf Yosef claims because also Elisha had merit of his own. In other words, he was the type of person. It's like he had his Rebbe, but he also had his own schut.
Sounds
Okay?
like when Shlomo
That's it.
asked for being the smartest one.
Right,
Not because he just wanted to show I should be the king, not just because of my father, not just because of the promise to my mom and all that.
very good.
Because I should be the king.
Yeah, right.
Maybe
Exactly.
that's why also Yeshua had the nest with the Haman, just to show Yeshua is actually the chosen one.
The first thing that Hashem ultimately
That's why they try to
Yeah.
make it that Moshe had the Chama to show Yeshua was like Moshe. That's what you're saying.
I know, I'm just saying, maybe that's why Yeshua was actually on the
No, it's very
Psukim,
clear,
a
see?
very big miracle
miracle.
specific to Yeshua.
החשש, I don't know if Hashem tells Yoshua or also, but can you tell Yoshua, אל תדאג, אם יהיה השם ממך כמשה,
Then you're going to be
then
good.
we'll be following you. They were worried about
Right.
that.
So that's what this whole midrash, this whole Gemara is very bothered by. All throughout Sefer Yoshua, it always goes back to like, first of all, chazak ve'emat, chazak ve'emat, chazak ve'emat, like over and over again with Yoshua. Like, why do you keep telling him that? Like he's the leader of the entire people. And also, you're right. It always refers to him as like Asher whatever, Torah Moshe, Asher whatever, halach b'darkei Moshe. And the people always say like Moshe Rabbeinu. It's like that's always he's just in the shadow of Moshe Rabbeinu, clearly, right? Anyway, so with the Anaf Yosef, just to close this point, the Anaf Yosef, he argues perhaps that the reason why the Zkanim said, Oy, Laota, Bosha, Kalima, is that unlike Elisha and Eliyahu, where Elisha had his own schut, in addition to being the Talmid Mufak of Eliyahu, Yoshua was the Talmid of Moshe, he received the Hod, but he didn't have his own schut to merit that doubling that Elisha had. Notice he got what Moshe got, but he didn't have like his own schut on top of that would have like propelled him even greater. And also it talks about like this idea of like on the shoulders of giants, that like in general you build from what previous generations had. He even talks about like discoveries in science and stuff that like you like a later scientist, if he has the information that a previous scientist had, he can make even greater discoveries based on that. That puts him not just at one, but at like 1 point something from the previous scientist because he has that. So it says Yoshua, like that was the potential there, that he could have been Moshe and greater, because he got what Moshe had, and then his own schut. The fact that he didn't fulfill that potential is what was Oy Laota Bosha, that he was just a reflection of Moshe Rabbeinu, and then he ties that again to the idea of the Chaman, the Levana, just reflecting the light instead of adding any light of its own. Sorry, someone wanted to say something before they interrupted, because I want to finish that point. Tov, יישר
Please
כוח.
stop it.
כוח.